The cold was not the killing kind that came fast. It was the slow kind, the kind that settled into your bones like a guest who had no intention of leaving. On this planet, a place with no name, only a number in a survey file that nobody read anymore, the cold had been here long before anything else, and it would be here long after. Inside a shallow cut in the black rock, two large shapes lay still. Sora had stopped moving 2 days ago, not because she could not move, but because moving cost heat, and heat was the one thing she could not afford to waste. She was old, older than most things that were still alive in this part of the galaxy. Her scales, which had once been the deep red of hot iron, had faded over the centuries to something closer to dried rust. The membranes of her wings were torn in 3 places, not from any fight, but simply from time. From the slow, patient work of a sickness that had no name in any language she knew. She lay with her long neck curved back along her own flank, her eyes half open, watching the entrance of the shelter. The entrance was a gap in the rock, wide enough for her to have walked through when she was younger and more foolish and still believed in going places. Now it was just a hole through which the wind pushed cold air and sometimes small stinging pieces of ice. Gaul lay beside her. He was smaller than her most things were and younger by 2 centuries, though that was not saying much. His scales were a dull grey blue, the color they went when his body ran low on everything. His breathing was shallow and even, the rhythm of something that had made a decision and was now simply waiting for the decision to finish. They had come here together. That was the Dravasi way. When the end came, you did not face it in front of others. You found a quiet place. You lay down. You let the universe take back what it had lent you. Sora had made her peace with it. She had lived a very long time. She had seen things that most creatures never would. She had been present at the last great gathering of her kind, 100 years ago, when 43 Dravasi had come together in the high atmosphere of a gas giant and simply flown, for hours, for no reason except that they could. She had remembered the sound of it, the wind under all those wings at once, a sound like a whole ocean deciding to fly. There were no others now, only her and Gaul, and soon there would be none. The wind outside changed pitch. Sora noticed it without caring. The storm had been speaking in different voices for days. She had stopped listening. But then something changed, something inside the sound. There was a rhythm to it, small, irregular, 2 beats, then a dragging sound, then 2 beats again. Something was moving out there. Sora's eyes opened fully for the first time in hours. She listened. She was old, but her hearing had not failed her yet. She tracked the sound as it came closer, and then closer still, and she decided it was probably one of the ice crawlers, the low, flat creatures that lived under the glacier and came up during storms to feed on whatever the wind brought them. She had seen them take a frozen bird once. They were patient things, ice crawlers. She respected that. But then the sound stopped just outside the entrance, and then something fell through the gap in the rock. It was small, that was the first thing. Whatever it was astonishingly small. It had 2 legs and 2 arms, and it hit the stone floor of the shelter and slid a short distance and came to a stop face down with one arm stretched out ahead of it, still gripping a bag by its strap. It lay there for a moment. Then it pushed itself up. The face it turned toward her was covered in frost damage, skin gone white and tight across the cheekbones, lips cracked, eyes red at the edges from the cold. It wore a suit that had been good once but was torn at the shoulder and patched with what looked like adhesive tape. The bag it was dragging was military surplus, badly battered, stuffed so full that the main zip had been supplemented by a length of wire. The creature looked at Sora, then it looked at Gaul, then it looked back at Sora. It said something. The small bead in its ear clicked and translated, "Okay, hi." Sora stared at it. She had seen humans before. Not many, and not recently, but she knew what they were. Small, fragile, warm-blooded in a way that made the cold dangerous to them very quickly. This one was already losing the fight with the temperature. She could see it in the way it held itself, the slight shaking in the hands, the way it breathed in short pulls rather than long ones. She said, in Galactic Common, because the translator bead in its ear would carry it, "Leave." The human blinked. Its translator processed the word and delivered it, she assumed, because something shifted in its expression. Not fear, not anger, something more like a man who had heard an argument he was prepared to disagree with. "There's nothing here for you," she continued. "This place is a dying place. If you stay, you will die with us, and that would be pointless." The human looked at the gap in the rock behind it. The wind pushed through in a long, cold sheet. Then the human looked back at her. Then it pulled the bag closer and began to open it. Sora watched. She was too tired for surprise. She was too tired for most things, but she watched because there was nothing else to do, and because something about this small creature was very strange, and strange things were the only things left that she found interesting. From the bag came a folded sheet of material that crinkled when it unfolded, silver on one side and dull on the other. The human wrapped it around its own shoulders. Then it pulled out a small flat disc and pressed a point on its surface, and a faint warmth began to push out from it, not much, but real, actual heat, spreading in a small circle across the stone floor. Then it pulled out a compact metal box with a folded handle and set it upright between itself and the two dragons, as if placing a small fire between them. Then it sat down with its back against the wall, pulled its knees up, and let out a long breath that came out as white mist. It looked at them both. It said, "I'm not going anywhere." Gaul made a sound. Sora turned to look at him because she had not heard him make any sound in more than a day. The sound was low and rough and came from somewhere deep in his chest, and it took her a long moment to understand what it was. He was laughing. It was the weakest laugh she had heard from him in 400 years, but it was real. She felt something move inside her, something old and small, like an ember she had believed was out, and she turned away from both of them and stared at the entrance of the shelter. Outside, the storm kept talking in its many voices. Inside, the small silver sheet crinkled as the human settled its weight. The heat disk put out its small circle of warmth, almost nothing, barely enough to matter. Sora told herself it did not change anything. She told herself this was foolish, and the creature would understand by morning what the cold actually was on this planet, and it would make better choices then. She lay still, she breathed slowly, she did not sleep. The human took out a small device, looked at something on its surface, and began to move a stylus across it in small, careful marks. She watched it for a long time. She did not know what to call the thing she was feeling. It was not hope. She had put hope down a long time ago, like a heavy thing she no longer had the strength to carry. It was something smaller than that, closer to curiosity, the feeling of watching something happen that you did not expect on a day when you had stopped expecting things. The wind pushed at the entrance. The disk put out its heat. The human kept writing. Sora closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to think. The grey light that came through the shelter entrance the next morning was not really light. It was just the storm being slightly less dark than the night had been. But it was enough to see by, and when Sora opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was that the human was still there. She had expected it to be dead. Not out of cruelty, she had simply applied the numbers. The temperature during the night had dropped below what a human body could survive without proper shelter. The survival suit the creature wore was damaged. It had one small heat disk and one reflective sheet. These were not enough. She knew what not enough looked like, and she had closed her eyes the previous night with the quiet assumption that by morning the problem would have resolved itself. Instead, the human was sitting cross-legged on the stone floor with its reflective sheet wrapped around both shoulders, its device in its lap, and 4 additional heat sources arranged in a careful ring around where it sat. The extra sources had come from somewhere inside the bag. It must have kept going after she closed her eyes, pulling things out and assembling them. 2 were salvage components she did not recognize. One appeared to be a battery pack with the casing removed, radiating heat directly. One was a chemical reaction pack taped to the inside of a curved metal panel that served as a reflector. The interior of the shelter was 4 degrees warmer than it had any right to be. Sora lay still and watched the human eat. It was eating something from a flat foil packet, compact rations of some kind, by the look of them. It chewed without hurrying, looking at the diagnostic device in its other hand. It had the manner of someone sitting at a table in a completely ordinary room, reviewing notes before a meeting. Then it looked up and noticed she was awake. "Good morning," it said. She said nothing. It looked at Gaul, who was breathing in the same slow pattern as the night before. Then it looked back at Sora. "He got through the night," it said. "That's better than I expected, actually." "You expected him to die," Sora said. "It was not a question." "I expected both of you might," the human said, without any particular feeling in the words. Just honesty. "I'm glad I was wrong." She studied it. The frost damage on its face was still visible, but had not worsened. The torn shoulder of its suit had been sealed. She could see a new layer of adhesive tape, applied in the night. It had been taking care of itself while she slept, quietly and without announcement. "What are you doing?" she asked. It held up the diagnostic device so she could see the screen, though she could not read the output from this distance. "Trying to understand what's wrong with him," it said, tilting its head toward Gaul. "My scanner isn't designed for this. It reads structural density and material integrity, for ships, not for living things." "Then it is useless." "It tells me where hard things are inside soft things," the human said. "That's a start." Sora looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "What species are you?" "Human." The word sat in the air between them. Sora turned it over in her memory. Human. She had encountered the species perhaps 4 times in her life, which was extraordinary given how long her life had been. The galaxy was large, and humans were relatively new to the wider parts of it, but she had heard of them more often than she had met them. Usually in contexts like unexpectedly difficult to remove from a situation, or arrived without invitation and then declined to leave, or insisted on attempting a thing that everyone agreed was impossible, and then continued to insist for a considerable time thereafter. She said, "I know of your kind. Good things, I hope. Mostly confusing things." The human made a short sound, not quite a laugh. It went back to its device. Some time passed. Sora watched it work. It moved the stylus in careful patterns, cross-referenced something, made a mark, crossed out the mark, made a different one. It did not look up or speak. Whatever it was doing it seriously. Then Gaul spoke. His voice was low and rough, like something moving through gravel, but it was clear. He said, in Galactic Common, "What species?" The human looked over at him. "Human," it said again. "Name's Rin." Gaul opened his eyes. They were amber, deep-set, and very old, and right now they were looking at the human with the particular attention of someone who had just seen something they needed to understand better. "We have heard of humans," Gaul said. "Most people have," Rin said. "You are very small. I've been told. And you walked through that storm." "I didn't have many other options," Rin said. He set the device on his knee and looked at Gaul directly. "Can I ask you something?" Gaul made a slow motion with his head that meant yes, in a way Rin's translator probably did not carry, but Rin seemed to read it anyway. "The thing inside you, on the left side, near the center, how long has that been there?" A pause. Gaul and Sora exchanged a look. It was not a long look, but it carried a great deal of information between two people who had known each other for centuries. Sora said, 41 years. Rin looked at her. 41 years, and you've both been alive this whole time. "The body compensates," Sora said. "For a while, it has been a slow thing." She kept her voice flat. She did not want to explain this. She did not want to talk about the Vethori raiders or the ambush or the way Gaul had fallen out of the sky, and she had caught him and carried him for 2 days until she found a place to land. She did not want to talk about any of it. "What is it?" Rin asked. "The thing inside him." "A fragment of a weapon, metal. The Vethori used spike launchers, magnetic propulsion. The spike lodged near his primary heart, and the magnetic charge did not fully discharge on impact." She paused. "It has been moving slowly toward the cardiac wall ever since." Rin was quiet. He picked up the device again and looked at the readings. His face did the thing that faces do when a person is doing arithmetic in their head. Still, slightly inward, the eyes not quite focused on anything in the room. Then he said, "I can't take it out." "No," Sora agreed, "you cannot. But I might be able to slow it down." Sora looked at him. "You have no medical knowledge. You have no equipment suited to Dravathi biology. You have tools for salvage work and cargo handling. What you are proposing is not possible." Rin nodded slowly, as if she had made a fair point that he was genuinely considering. "Probably not," he said. Then he opened a second section of the bag and began laying out more tools on the stone floor, one by one, in a neat row. Sora stared at him. She had spoken with members of 37 species in her long life. She had argued with soldiers and diplomats and scholars and merchants. She had faced down creatures that could swallow this shelter whole. In all of that time, she had never encountered anything quite like the specific experience of delivering a thorough and accurate list of reasons why something was impossible, and having the other party respond by taking out their tools. She said, "Are you listening to me?" "Yes," Rin said. He was examining a compact cylindrical device, a repolarization tool of some kind, by the shape of it. He turned it over in his hands. "You're right that it probably won't work." "Then why?" "Because the other option definitely won't work," he said. He set the tool down and looked at her with calm, tired eyes. "And I'd rather try the thing that probably won't work than do nothing. That's just how I'm built, I think." He picked up his stylus and went back to taking notes. Pages of them. Careful, small marks across the screen of his device, in a language she could not read, about two creatures he had never met before last night, on a planet where none of the three of them were supposed to be alive. Sora turned away. She looked at the shelter entrance. The storm was still going. The pale gray light shifted and moved. She told herself again that none of this changed anything. She told herself the situation was what it was, and no amount of small human stubbornness would alter the basic facts of it. She almost believed it. On the third day, Rin stopped taking notes and started explaining his idea. He laid the tools out on the stone floor in a specific order first. This seemed to be something he needed to do before he could talk, as though the arrangement of the objects helped him think. Then he sat back, looked at the two dragons, and said what he had worked out. The fragment in Gaul's chest was magnetic. Not permanently, but residually. The discharge from the spike launcher had not fully released when it hit, and the metal retained a low-level charge that had been interacting with the natural electromagnetic field that all Dravathi produced from their biology. The field pulled the fragment. Slowly, over decades, but always in one direction. What Rin had was a magnetic repolarization tool. It was designed for resetting the polarity in cargo locks that had seized up due to long exposure to deep space conditions. It was not a medical instrument. It was not subtle. It put out a strong, focused pulse that could flip the magnetic orientation of a metal object within a limited range. His theory was this: if he could match the pulse to the exact frequency of the residual charge in the fragment, he might be able to null it, not remove the fragment, not heal the damage, just stop the pull, freeze the movement. Turn the thing from a slow-moving threat into simply a piece of metal stuck in a bad place, still dangerous, still wrong, but not getting worse. When he finished explaining, Sora said nothing for a long moment. Then she began to list the problems, and she was thorough about it. She started with the fact that he had no way to map the exact frequency of the residual charge without a proper instrument, that the repolarization tool operated at a fixed frequency that might not match, that the pulse would pass through Gaul's body tissue, and she had no way to know what effect that would have, that the fragment was positioned in one of the most dangerous possible locations relative to the cardiac wall, and that the only person proposing this had arrived on this planet by crashing a cargo ship into a glacier. Rin listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "All of that is true. Then you understand why this cannot be attempted." "I understand why it might not work," he said. "That's different." He looked at Gaul. "It's his call." There was a silence. Gaul had been lying with his eyes open for the last hour, listening to all of it. He breathed in a slow, measured way, the way someone breathes when each breath is a small act of concentration. Now he looked at Sora. He said something in Old Dravasi. The translator bead on Rin's ear did nothing. The language was too old, too rare, too far outside anything in the translation library. But Sora heard it. She heard it, and she looked away toward the shelter entrance for a long time. Her jaw was tight. Something moved in her expression that she did not want anyone to see. What Gaul had said was, "I would rather go out reaching than go out waiting. You know that about me." She did know that about him. She had known it for 400 years. She turned back to Rin. She said, "If this goes wrong, you will have killed him faster than the fragment would have." "I know," Rin said. "You understand that?" "Yes." "And you will still try?" He looked at her steadily. He said yes, so yes. Sora said nothing more. She moved closer to Gaul, settling her weight near his side, not touching him, because touch during a procedure like this would interfere, but near enough that he would know she was there. That was all she could do. Rin picked up the repolarization tool. He spent a long time calibrating it, adjusting it in small increments, checking the diagnostic device after each adjustment. He did not rush. He did not talk. The shelter was very quiet, except for the wind outside and the faint clicks of the tool being adjusted. Then he moved into position. He had studied the diagnostic scans enough to know roughly where the fragment sat. He held the tool at the right distance and angle, held his breath, and activated it. Nothing visible happened. That was expected. The pulse was not something you could see, but the diagnostic device registered a response. The fragment's charge reacted to the pulse, spiked briefly, and then settled. The fragment had moved. Not in the direction it was going. Sideways, the wrong kind of movement. Rin switched the tool off fast. He stared at the readings. He made an adjustment. He tried again. This time the fragment reacted and then held still, but the charge reading did not null. It inverted, which was not the same thing and was potentially worse. He switched it off again. Sora was watching the diagnostic screen now, having moved close enough to read it. She said nothing. Her breathing was very controlled. Rin sat back on his heels. He looked at the tool. He looked at the screen. He made a third adjustment, a smaller one, changing not the frequency but the pulse duration. A shorter burst, less force, more precision. He looked at Gaul. Gaul had his eyes closed. His breathing was the same. Rin held the tool steady and applied the third pulse. The charge reading on the diagnostic screen climbed, held at its peak for 2 seconds that felt much longer than 2 seconds, and then dropped. Not to inversion, not to a spike, it dropped to almost nothing. And the drift indicator, the small line on the screen that had been showing the fragment's slow movement toward the cardiac wall for as long as Rin had been reading it, stopped moving. The line went flat. Rin lowered the tool to the floor very carefully, as though putting it down too fast might break whatever had just happened. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time, waiting for the line to move again. It stayed flat. He sat back and let out a breath that he seemed to have been holding for the entire third attempt. It went on for a while, that breath. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor. Sora looked at the diagnostic screen. She looked at it from several angles, the way you look at something when you are trying to find the mistake, the catch, the part that says this is not actually real. She could not find it. The line was flat. She looked at Gaul. His breathing was the same, no worse, possibly very slightly in a way she could not be certain of yet, easier. She looked at Rin. He was not celebrating. He was not declaring anything. He was sitting on the stone floor of a shelter on a planet with no name, with a salvage tool in his hand and frost damage on his face, and he was looking at the diagnostic screen with the expression of someone who had just done a thing they were not certain was possible and were now waiting to see if it would hold. Sora had no word for what she felt in that moment in any of the 7 languages she spoke. There was something in the old Dravasi, a term for the feeling when the world proves it is stranger than you believed it was, stranger in the direction of mercy rather than cruelty. But she had not used that word in a very long time, and it felt strange on the inside of her mind, like a room that had been closed for years, now opened. She looked away from Rin. She looked at the entrance of the shelter. She breathed slowly. After a while, Rin said, quietly and to no one in particular, "Okay." Just that, one word, and then he picked up his device and began updating his notes. Sora sat with Gaul and listened to the storm outside, which had not changed at all, and to the breathing inside the shelter, which had. The storm had been talking for 5 days. By the 5th day, all 3 of them had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a sound that is always there. It became the background of everything, the noise behind the quiet, and the quiet inside the shelter took on a particular quality because of it. Not empty, just sheltered. Gaul was stable. That was the word Rin used, and Sora had come to understand it meant something specific in the human context. Not recovered, not well, but not getting worse. The line on the diagnostic screen stayed flat. His breathing had not improved to anything you could call normal, but it had not worsened since the 3rd day, and that alone was something she had not expected to see. Rin's food supply was a thing they did not discuss openly, but all 3 of them were aware of. He had 11 compact ration packs when he arrived. He now had 7. He had given 2 to Sora on the 2nd morning, sliding them across the stone floor without explanation, before she had eaten or asked or said anything about food. She had not thanked him. She was not certain how to thank something for a gesture it seemed to have made without thinking. She had eaten the rations. They tasted of nothing, but they were food, and she was alive, and the sickness that ate at her membranes and her scales required energy to fight even partially. On the 5th evening, when the light had gone and the heat packs made small orange circles in the dark and Gaul was sleeping, Sora spoke. She did not plan to. It happened the way certain things happen, not as a decision, but as a weight that finally becomes greater than your ability to hold it still. She said, "I will tell you something about us, since you are here and we are here, and the storm has not killed any of us yet." Rin put down his device. He gave her his full attention in the way she had noticed he always did, not performing attention, just actually paying it. She told him about the Dravasi, not from the beginning was too long and she was too tired. She told him the small things, because the small things were what she found she wanted to say. She told him that young Dravasi tested their flame for the first time when they were about 30 years old, and the sound they made when it finally came was not triumph. It was surprise. Every time, with every youngling, pure surprise, as though the fire was always a gift they did not expect. She told him what the bonding flight looked like from the ground, 2 Dravasi rising in a thermal together, intertwining their flight paths until the 2 lines became one spiral. She told him that the last gathering, a century ago, had not been a sad occasion, though they all knew it would be the last. It had been loud and warm, and full of old arguments and old jokes and old names spoken aloud for the first time in decades, and they had all flown together in the high cold air above a gas giant until their wings ached, and when they came down no one spoke about the fact that it was over. Rin listened to all of it. He did not say sorry, which she appreciated. He did not make the face that other species made, the one that meant "I am very sad about your tragedy, and I want you to see that I am sad." He just listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Was it worth it? All of it, I mean, the whole long thing." She had expected a different kind of question. Something about the politics of their decline, or the wars, or what it felt like to be the last. She thought about the question he had actually asked. She thought about it seriously, turning it over the way you turn a stone to see what is underneath. "Yes," she said, not quickly, not automatically, after actually looking at the answer. "Even with the ending." "The ending is the smallest part," she said. "A long life is mostly middle. The middle was real. The middle was very—" She paused, searching for the word in Galactic Common and not finding the right one. It was very full. Rin nodded. He looked at the heat pack for a moment. Then Sora said, "Tell me something in return." He looked up. He seemed slightly surprised by this, by her asking. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not about humans, about you." He thought about it. He did not rush. She appreciated that also. Then he told her about his mother. Not a long story. She had lived on a transit station, one of the mid-belt waypoints where cargo runners stopped to refuel and resupply. Transit stations were not designed for living things that needed soil and light and growing, but his mother had decided that was an engineering problem rather than a fact, and she had built a garden in a corner of the station's secondary bay. Hydroponics, salvaged lighting panels, a water reclamation rig. She had assembled herself from parts that were meant for other purposes. She grew food, not enough to matter at first, enough for the crew quarters above the bay, then more. She gave most of it away, more than she kept, and when people told her she should sell it, she said she could not think of a reason to. She had developed a strain of a leafy plant that could grow in low light and recycled air and minimal soil. It was not remarkable by outside standards. On a transit station, it was extraordinary. Before she died, she had shared the seed and the method with 6 other stations that were interested. She did not live to see what happened with it. Rin paused. I found out about 8 years ago, he said. The strain spread. Stations shared it with outposts. Outposts shared it with ships doing long runs. Last time I checked, it was feeding about 40,000 people. Sora looked at him. She never knew, he said. She died before any of that happened. She just made the thing and gave it away, and that was it. Gaul's voice came from the dark, low and rough. He had been awake, she realized, for some time. He said, she did not need to know. Rin looked over at him. No, he said, she didn't. The act was complete when she made it, Gaul said. He breathed slowly. The knowing is for the ones who come after. It was not necessary for her. Rin was quiet for a long moment. Something moved in his face, not sadness exactly. More like the feeling of hearing something said correctly that you had been trying to say to yourself for a long time. You are very like her, Gaul said. I don't know about that, Rin said. You fed us, Sora said. It came out before she decided to say it. You did not tell us, you did not ask, you simply did it. Rin looked at her. He seemed slightly uncomfortable, the way people look when a truth about them is named out loud. I didn't think about it, he said. Yes, Sora said, that is exactly what I mean. Silence, the heat packs glowed. The storm moved outside in its slow, permanent conversation with the rock and the ice. After a while, Gaul's breathing deepened into sleep. Rin's head dropped back against the wall and his eyes went distant and then closed. The device slid off his knee and he caught it in his sleep without waking and held it. Sora sat in the dark and looked at this strange, small, warm-blooded creature that had walked out of a blizzard and was now asleep in a shelter with the last 2 members of an ancient species, both of whom he had kept alive through the application of cargo tools and ration packs and a kind of stubborn refusal to do the sensible thing. She thought about what Gaul had said. The act was complete when she made it. She thought about all the things she had done in her long life that she had never seen the end of. She thought about whether that had mattered, whether any of it had required her to be there for the conclusion, or whether the making had always been enough. Outside, the storm spoke in its patient voice. Inside, for the first time since they had come to this place to die, all 3 of them slept. The storm broke on the 7th day. There was no dramatic moment to it. No sudden silence, no parting of clouds, no light cutting through. The wind simply became less, and then less than that, and by mid-morning there was only a cold stillness outside the shelter and a pale flat light that came through the entrance and reached the floor. Rin stood at the gap in the rock for a long time, looking out. The world outside was white and black, white glacier stretching in every direction, black rock ridges cutting through it, and a sky the color of old pewter that told him nothing about temperature, except that it was very cold and intended to stay that way. He went back inside and opened the beacon housing. The emergency beacon was a standard unit, the kind required on all registered cargo ships, small, orange, built to survive a crash, which was why it had survived his. He had been boosting the signal manually for 6 days using salvaged components from his suit and the bag, giving it more range than it was designed to have. He had not been sure it was doing anything. The weather interference on this planet was severe enough that signals collapsed within a few thousand kilometers. But the storm had broken. He ran the boost sequence again and waited. 18 minutes later, the beacon registered a relay response. He read it twice to be sure. Then he read it a third time. A syndicate survey vessel, registration code, current heading, current speed. The relay response put it at the edge of close range, close enough for a drop pod deployment if the ship was willing. He opened the comm channel. The officer on the other end was a Helvari, a lean, pale-skinned species with long hands and the general air of someone who had filed a great many complaints about things that were not their problem. He was not unfriendly. He was the specific kind of careful that people are when they are deciding how much trouble something is going to be. He confirmed the ship's position. He confirmed that an extraction was possible. He confirmed the drop pod specifications, a single passenger configuration rated for 200 kilograms including gear, with a 40-kilometer deployment range from the ship's current trajectory. Then he said, "We can get you out. Pod drops in 3 hours if you want it." Rin said, "Can I ask about weight configurations?" A pause. Standard configuration is fixed at 200 kilograms. It's a single-passenger emergency unit. If I repositioned the internal stabilizer pylons and removed the non-essential passenger support equipment, what would the load tolerance be? A longer pause. That's not something we recommend. I know, but structurally, what would the numbers look like? The officer went away from the comm for a moment. When he came back, he said, "I'm not authorizing any modification to the pod. We'd be liable." "I'm not asking for authorization. I'm asking for the structural specifications." Another pause, then, reluctantly, some numbers. Rin wrote them down. He thanked the officer and told him to send the pod. Then he ended the comm and sat down on the floor of the shelter with his device and his notes and his salvage tools and started doing arithmetic. Sora had been watching from the moment the beacon responded. She had not spoken. She did not speak now. She watched him work. Gaul said, "1 pod." "Yes," Rin said. He did not look up from the numbers. "1 person." "That's the current design," Rin said. He turned the device in his hands and looked at it from a different angle. Gaul was quiet, then he said, "Take it." "I'm not doing that. There is no logic in refusing it." "I know." Rin put the device down on the floor and picked up the structural specification printout he had scrawled on the inside of a ration pack wrapper. "Logic isn't what I'm running on right now." Sora said, "Rin." He looked at her. "We have had more days than we expected," she said. "That is because of you. It was not nothing. You should understand that before you do something unnecessary with your life." "I understand it," he said. "I'm still not leaving without you." She looked at him for a long time. She had spoken with many creatures in her life who said things with great conviction. Most of them could be reasoned with, or worn down, or redirected. She looked at this human's face, and she could find none of those openings. There was nothing to redirect. He had simply decided, and the decision was not connected to logic in any way that logic could reach. She said, "Tell me what you are thinking." "The pod stabilizer pylons are the heaviest single component," he said. "They're designed for rough terrain deployment, hydraulic legs, active leveling system. The whole assembly is about 60 kilograms. If I strip it and use static landing struts instead, just metal rods welded to the frame, I save 60 kilograms and lose active leveling. Which means the landing is harder." "Harder, yes, not unsurvivable. If I strip the passenger life support redundancies, the secondary air system, the backup heat unit, the emergency medical bay, that's another 40, maybe 45 kilograms." He looked at the numbers. "And if I pull out the interior seating and support framework entirely, I get roughly another 30. Sora looked at the numbers. She was doing the same arithmetic. That is 130 kilograms, potentially 135. "Right. You need 300 And 40 more. 380, Rin said. I know. Gaul said, it is not possible. Not with the pod as it arrives, Rin said. He chewed his lip. He looked at the shelter around them. He looked at the black rock walls that Sora had sealed with the last of her fire. He looked at the floor. Then he looked at his bag. Then he looked at Sora. He said, when you sealed the walls, your fire, how hot does it get? She said, hot enough to melt certain rock compositions, certain metals. Why? The pod's chassis is rated to survive crash conditions, he said slowly. The structural frame is over-engineered for the passenger capacity. If I remove the outer hull panels and rework the frame geometry, lighten the superstructure while keeping the core integrity. Sora said, you would need to weld. I would need to melt and reform, Rin said, which is different. She looked at him, he looked at her. They were having the same thought at the same time, which was a strange feeling between two creatures from completely different worlds. My fire is not precise, she said. I can work around imprecision, he said. I've been doing it for a week. Gaul made the rough sound that Sora recognized as a laugh. It was stronger than the first time. 3 days of stability had given him something back, not much, but enough. Tell me what shape you need, Sora said. For the 3 hours before the pod arrived, they planned together. Rin drew diagrams on the inside of ration wrappers. Sora told him which structural approaches a Dravasi flame could and could not achieve accurately. Gaul, from where he lay, talked them through the geometry. He had an old mind and a precise one, and he described three-dimensional spatial relationships in words with a clarity that made Rin stop twice and stare at him. When the pod arrived, descending on auto-guidance and landing 200 meters from the shelter entrance, Rin walked out to it alone in the cold and looked at it for a long moment. Then he went back inside for his tools. The work that followed was the kind of work that happened in silence. Rin stripped components and carried them out into the glacier ice, piece by piece. Sora walked to the pod for the first time. It was the first time she had stood fully upright in days, and Rin stopped to watch her rise without comment, and then went back to what he was doing. She looked at the frame structure he had described and understood what needed to happen to it. Her fire came in 3 careful breaths. It was not as strong as it would have been once, but it was enough. The metal gave where it needed to give. The frame reformed. Rin worked the hot sections with his tools, shaping them while they were still workable, moving fast because hot metal did not stay workable for long. When it was done, the pod looked like something that had survived a disaster rather than something that had just been delivered, which, in a way, was accurate. Rin stood back and looked at it. Then he did the math one more time in his head with his eyes closed. He opened his eyes. He looked at Sora. It's going to be a tight fit, he said. She looked at the pod. She looked at Gaul. She looked back at the pod. Then she made the low sound that Rin had learned over the past 7 days was the Dravasi equivalent of a laugh. It was the first one he had heard from her. It was not a small sound. Gaul heard it from inside the shelter, and he made the same sound back. And for a moment, the black rock overhang on the nameless ice planet held something that it had not held in a very long time, 2 Dravasi laughing, and a human standing in the cold between them, smiling in the particular way of someone who does not know why everyone is laughing, but is glad it is happening. The pod launched wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. Wrong in the way that a thing built to do one job and then modified in a glacier by a human with cargo tools and 2 dying dragons would naturally go wrong. The thrust compensators, stripped of their automatic adjustment systems, could not balance the uneven weight distribution in the first 3 seconds of flight, and the pod spun a quarter rotation before Rin grabbed manual control and corrected it. He was wedged into a corner approximately the size of a storage locker. He had stripped out everything that could be stripped, which meant there was no seat, no padding, no restraints that fitted anything in this pod. He had improvised a harness using webbing from the bag, which was holding mostly. Sora occupied the central space, folded in a way that Sora was not designed to fold. Her neck curved along the inside of the pod's upper wall. Gaul was against the opposite side. his breathing still shallow but controlled. The three of them took up the entirety of the interior space with no margin. Rin hand flew the pod for 11 minutes. His left arm was pressed against Gaul's flank. The vibration from the improvised frame ran through his whole body. The thrust compensators screamed at him in a frequency he could feel in his back teeth, and he talked to them calmly, adjusting, compensating, giving a little and taking a little, the way you manage something that is trying very hard to fail. The Syndicate ship received them. Or rather, the Syndicate ship attempted to receive them and failed on the first approach, because the pod's docking profile had changed enough from its standard configuration that the automated docking arm did not know how to grip it, and Rin had to override the arm's targeting system and talk a very confused crew member through a manual docking sequence over the comm, while simultaneously keeping the pod steady enough that the arm had something to grip. The docking arm found a hold on the third attempt. The pod clanged into the bay hard enough to rattle everything and everyone inside it. Silence. Rin let go of the controls. He looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly, which was fine. That was the reasonable response to the last 11 minutes. Gaul made a sound. Sora made a sound back. They were not words. They were just sounds, the specific sounds of two creatures who have been through something and are still here. The docking bay door on the ship's side opened. Several crew members came through, stopped, and stood completely still. The Syndicate captain arrived perhaps 2 minutes later. She came at a fast walk that slowed as she cleared the doorway and saw what was in her docking bay. She was a Helvari, long-fingered, careful, carrying herself with the precise posture of someone who had managed difficult situations for a long time. She stopped at a respectful distance. She looked at Sora, she looked at Gaul. Then she looked at Rin, who had found his way to the edge of the pod's opening and was sitting there with his legs hanging out. His frost-damaged face, his torn suit, and the look of a man who was extremely tired and would like something to drink. She said, "How?" He said, "Carefully." There was a pause. Then she said something to her crew in the sharp Helvari double tone that he could not follow, and people began to move with purpose. What followed was not elegant. Getting Sora and Gaul out of a pod that had been reshaped around them required the docking bay to be fully cleared, 2 cargo cranes to be re-rigged, and 40 minutes of careful collaborative effort in which Sora had to instruct the crane operators in exactly where to place the grips, because she knew where it would and would not hurt. She did this with the directness of someone who had long ago stopped finding anything embarrassing. They were given the largest cargo hold on the ship. The Syndicate crew brought what they had thermal padding from freight containers. The ship's medical officer, who was qualified in 3 species, and Dravasi was not one of them, but who worked with what the diagnostic records showed and was careful and honest about the limits of what she knew. The fragment in Gaul's chest was imaged properly for the first time. The medical officer looked at the readings for a long time, then looked at Rin's hand-drawn notes, then looked at the diagnostic data from the past 7 days, and said, very quietly, that whatever he had done appeared to have worked, and she was not going to touch anything until they reached a proper facility. The news spread faster than Rin expected things to spread. He was not certain how it got out. He suspected the Syndicate officer who had been reluctant to send the pod. Perhaps the story was interesting enough that it could not be kept inside the ship. By the time they reached the nearest station with xenobiology capability, there were people waiting who had not been called there by the ship. He gave one interview. A journalist from one of the major relay networks wanted to speak to him, and he agreed because the captain suggested it would be better than the story being told entirely without him. He sat in a chair in the station medical wing and answered questions for 12 minutes, and then said he was done and left. He did not think he had said anything particularly interesting. The journalist seemed to disagree. The story went everywhere. He did not follow it. Sora and Gaul were transferred to a specialist facility 3 weeks later, a rehabilitation station orbiting a warm yellow star in a system with a name he could not pronounce correctly in any of its 3 versions. The surgical team that removed the fragment from Gaul's chest took 6 hours and told Rin afterward that the polarization hold had been the difference between an operable situation and an inoperable one. The fragment had been 1 week, perhaps less, from the cardiac wall at the point of intervention. Rin was given a replacement cargo ship, a slightly better one than the one he had crashed, which he suspected had something to do with the captain's advocacy and possibly the interview. He took a contract, filed a route, and went back to work. It was the most comfortable he had felt since the 7th day on the glacier. 7 months later, a message arrived in his ship's comm, audio only. He was 3 days into a long haul and had been listening to the silence of the route for most of it, so the notification was noticeable. He played it. Sora's voice, lower than he remembered it, slower but clear. She told him that the xenobiologists studying the Dravathi genome had found something they had not expected. The decline of the species was not, as had been believed, fully irreversible. There were markers in the genetic record that suggested certain conditions, under certain specific circumstances, might allow for, she chose the word carefully, a continuation, not a recovery, not a return, a continuation, small, uncertain. But real, in the way that small, uncertain things could be real if they were given enough time and care. She said she was telling him because she had thought about what kind of person to tell, and he was the one she had decided on. She said that he had, in her observation, an irrational affection for small, uncertain possibilities, and she thought he would want to know about this one. Then she was quiet for a moment. Just the soft, ambient sound of the rehabilitation station in the background, distant voices, equipment, the hum of a warm and inhabited place. She said, "The Dravasi do not have a custom of thanking, we have a custom of remembering. The ones we remember completely, not as a story we tell, but as a presence we carry. You will be remembered, Rin, by the last 2 who remember anything at all." Another pause. He could hear her breathing. It was steadier than it had been on the glacier. The sickness was still there. She had told him, in the weeks at the first station, that the damage was too old to fully reverse. But it was slower now. She said, "That is not a small thing." The message ended. Rin sat in his pilot's seat and looked at the comm screen. He looked at it for a while. Through the front viewport, the route stretched ahead, stars in a dark field, unhurried, going on further than he could track. He thought about his mother's garden. He thought about the way she gave food away without counting it. He thought about 40,000 people eating something she had never seen them eat, on stations she had never visited, from seeds she had handed to strangers on the understanding that they might do something with them. He thought about 2 ancient dragons breathing on a warm station, carrying a word in a language so old that no translator could reach it, a word that meant something very close to, present, remembered here. He picked up the cargo manifest. He checked the route. He adjusted course by half a degree for a gravity assist that would save him 4 hours on the back end. Then he went back to work. Somewhere very far away, in the golden light of a yellow star, Sora raised her head from where she rested and looked at the light coming through the station window, and Gaul breathed beside her, steady and slow, the way breathing sounds when it is no longer a question. The Dravathi was still here. For now, that was enough. And now had a way of lasting if you gave it something to hold onto.